Hello, and welcome to Communities Connected, a land and lifestyle podcast brought to you by Alisant. My name is Danette Beal. I am Vice President of Marketing at Alisant, and I am here with April Lamont, who is co-founder and CEO of Alisant, and our special guest, Amy Levi. Amy is the co-founder and CEO of Strada Made. They are a marketing, branding, and placemaking agency based out of Denver, Colorado. You've probably heard of them, or at least the communities they've worked at. They've worked all across the United States, including Painted Tree in McKinney, Texas, excuse me, as well as Nexton in South Carolina. Amy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Great. Well, let's get started. We've got, a lot of fun things that we're going to explore today, but first I want to hear a little bit about your background.
Well, let me go back a little bit to the origin story of Amy Levi. Quick little walk down memory lane. Um, so my story started in the suburbs of North Dallas. It's where my sister and I were born and raised. And in so many ways, even though I had a great childhood, believe me, happy childhood, parents are still together, still alive, all is good. I never really felt a sense of real belonging where I grew up. And I don't know, maybe it was because my sister and I were first generation Texans. And if you know Texas at all, you know that if you don't have multiple generations buried in the cemetery, you're not really Texan. My family's from New York and New Jersey originally, and so we were kind of the Yankees that lived in our, little suburb of Dallas, and we were also Jewish, living in the Bible Belt, and I think I just didn't really feel like I had my people entirely, even though I had a lovely childhood. So, my story kinda starts there, and my parents, felt strongly that my sister and I needed to get out of Dallas and experience other places, so they sent us, like a lot of Jewish families, to summer camp. We went all summer to a summer camp in, Wisconsin, actually, and so I think they were like, "Let us get you out of the heat, the summer heat of Texas, and wanna make sure you meet new people and see new places," and so, kinda grew up going to summer camp, and I met my best friend there, who is still my best friend today, and she grew up and lives in the suburbs of Chicago, and, grew up kind of in the north side of Chicago, and I grew up visiting her, and I just remember vividly as a kid that she lived in a very different place than I did growing up, and it was there was a train station. You could take the train to downtown. You could walk anywhere. You could and it had this cute little downtown, actually, they called it Uptown, and we would walk everywhere. We'd walk to the stationery store, we'd walk to, ice cream, and everybody was out and about walking. Like, as a young person, I felt welcome, and I saw older people out walking, and I just remember thinking, "This feels good to me." I mean, I grew up where, getting in a car, going to the mall, like, that was my upbringing, and so it sparked at a very early age my awareness of my environment and how place shapes you, and, um, I didn't exactly realize this, but when I went to college, I ended up studying cultural anthropology and advertising. The cultural anthropology part was an accident. My career counselor said, "With a few more classes, you actually could get a major in this," you know? Turns out, like, I'd taken enough classes in it, and, that was where my interest lied, and I'll have to say that served me much more in my career, than maybe advertising as a classic field of study has, and it really has just helped cultivate my curiosity about the places we build um, and ideally how those connect to some of our most important human needs, right? Belonging, memory, um, and a shared identity about a place. And so that's a little bit about how how I got to this general world of place interest in placemaking. My first job out of college was I really wanted to work for an ad agency, couldn't get a job, nobody was hiring. There was a home builder hiring. And I thought, well, I know nothing about home building, but maybe there's something to be learned on being on the client side of this business. So, I ended up working for a big public home builder, and 4 years later, found myself just really captured by the category. Mostly in that instance, it was like, "I think we can do better than this," kind of observation. Yeah, and I just fell in love with the subject of community development and how important that is, and I think if I would have landed at an ad agency that sold, typical goods and services like detergent or beer, I think I would have probably gotten out of the business early. So it was just a lot of people, just kind of this funny little journey that landed me eventually where I met my partner, um, David Lancaster. Most people know him as Link, copywriter. He and I met at an agency actually in Denver that I went to after I worked for the home builder, and we started Strada 28 years ago. And that was I don't know, god, I can't even believe it's been 28 years. We're about 40 people today. So, as you said, doing work across the country, really try to um, work on as we like to say, creating magnetic places and brands.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. When I think about anthropology, I think about archaeology and, um, old things in the past. But when I think about Strata Made and what you all are doing, it makes absolute sense because you are building community for the future and you're taking learnings from the past to be able to get there. So, I would love to start exploring that as far as, how do you start building the story around a community or where does that inspiration come from?
It's a funny thing. It's not a formula. We definitely have a practice and some best practices. Early on in my career, one of my early mentors, Sandra Cully, she shared a quote with us, and it was this. It was all good places have one foot in memory and one foot in prophecy. And that has really shaped us. And that is, I have to say, that's where we start when we start on any kind of, you know, new project. We get curious about both what I would call place keeping and placemaking. So, um, what one of the things I always tell my team is there are no new places. Every location has a history, it has a culture, it has a geography that shapes it. And of course, it has a market opportunity to really pursue. Um, but sometimes we get on the land and we think, well, what? There's nothing here, right? Where do we start? And there's always something there. Is sometimes you have to dig a little deeper, and it's not always exactly on that piece of land, but it's in the broader environment that where the culture has been kind of defined. And we spend a lot of time exploring the memory and then also looking for what I call like cool hunting in a market where it's like, okay, what are signs? What is behavior that we can trace that gives us a little insight about what the community wants to become?
Where do you find that? I mean, how much time do you spend, like, physically on site, um, in an immersion? Or I mean, I can see now why the cultural anthropology piece really informs what you do. That's a great combo.
And it really is about curiosity, right? Like, you gotta dig, and you have to really wanna understand what makes a place that place. You don't wanna just import ideas. So how do we do that? How much time do we spend? Well, we always like an immersion that is with the full design team. We find that that's the most inspiring place to start. So get out, walk the land, and that the design team includes often, the urban planners, the architects, the research teams, and of course our client. But A lot of it is the back study that you do before you even show up for an immersion. There's so much you can find out online today and kinda go deep. And also track a lot of, we call it empathy research, which is just looking online to different conversations and threads about different parts of town to see what people are upset about sometimes, what they wanna not see change. That'll give you some ideas, and sometimes, a lot of people are anti-growth, but really what they just are anti is growth and change happening to them versus with them. So, it's really kind of understanding that, and sometimes it's like we just say, "Okay, it's not doesn't have to be a place that's really close to the project, but take us to the parts of town that are kind of the new up and coming areas. Let's see how that's expressing itself." And I always like this is gonna sound crazy, but I love going to grocery stores. I love people watching, so you can just see a lot about and learn a lot about a community by going into its grocery store. It's kind of superficial, I get that, but you see what kind of cars they're driving and how they dress and what they look like, and, sometimes that's just really eye-opening.
So it sounds like that's really where the differentiation comes from in what you guys are starting to build. We look at there's this shift with communities where it used to be very amenity based, if they had the pool or if they had the pickleball courts or the tennis facility. But what I'm hearing from you is a lot of where that differentiation is coming from is in the human experience and what's actually happening in the community that's existing around the place that you're beginning to build. Is that correct?
I think so. I mean, the way that we talk about it is we really try to get to the why of a place before we get to the what of a place. So it's like before we get to like what are the experiences we're having here, it's really why. Why is what problems is this going to address in somebody's life? What are the big drivers for making a change, getting them to move? Um, so much in this category of real estate is what we're selling, not why. And people, you know, it's like that saying around like, people are logical, yes, but they're emotional first. They're logical in how they justify what they want. So getting to that real deeper desire. Right. That's what we try to get to with like a big idea of a place. Um And, one that just comes to mind immediately is something we've been working on recently and just opened a project called Two Step Farm in, have you been out there?
Yeah, we work with, the Painted Tree team, so we've been watching your work unfold with two-step, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so Oxland, the
Sure,
developer,
yeah, Tom and Christina and
Tom and Christina, yeah, I mean, what a great, example of getting to the why before the what, and when I think about, like, some of those early immersion trips, so Two Step Farm, just for a little context, it's in Houston, it's on the north side of Houston, just north of the Woodlands, and when we went out to kind of understand Montgomery County, where it's located, one of the things that we discovered, it did take some digging, and I think we kinda discovered this online before we actually bumped into it in any experience physically on site, was that Montgomery County is the birthplace of the American flag, or excuse me, of the Texas flag. Well, Texans are pretty proud of that flag, and, we thought, "Well, that's really interesting that that happened here," and there's so much history, Texas history, that has happened in this part of Texas, and there's also a big music history, and this big idea, this big why became this, like, we want this place, before it had a name, to be a love letter to Texas. And we want people to, come together around music and food, and as Christina coined it, Texana, which is the Texas culture, that the feeling of being Texan and the pride in that. And we landed on the name Two Step Farm, which then gave rise to a lot of ideas around amenities and things of that nature. But it was this love letter to Texas, this kind of wanting to embrace and kind of bring back that culture of that community in a meaningful way. That was our reason for being really early on.
One of the things I really admire and appreciate about your work is the layering. There's certainly the depth, right, that you're talking about of that connection to the history, the culture, the uniqueness of what makes that space what it is or that property what it is. But you also, from my observation looking in, think about the layers of how that gets expressed in terms of, is this, if I'm driving by mentally or physically, what is my takeaway going to be if I'm spending a little bit of time, you know, so the depth of the brand is profound versus just like, okay, here's the name and a font and a color palette. I think about a number of clients that we work on together, whether it's Sunbridge or Pecan Square. There's that visual shorthand. The dog at Pecan Square is a great example. That is which is our icon on the face of your phone for that app. It is instantly recognizable. I know exactly where I am when I look at the sea of apps on my phone. I know exactly what I'm looking for, and yet there's that isn't the end, you know? There's so much depth within the brand architecture and identity architecture. How you must have a best practice around thinking through that whole stack. How does that it's like magic, Amy.
Well, I love hearing that, as your impression of our work, so thank you for that, April. I think the depth of our work is something that does distinguish us, and it's why we really focus in on placemaking and marketing and branding, and you can't have really one without the other. I mean, you can't have a great brand without a great place. You can have a great place without a great brand. That actually does work. So what we really try to do is to go deep into the place making with our clients and envisioning it. And that's, sometimes that is early on in a project when you've got that blank piece of paper or you're just walking the land, but sometimes that is midstream on a project too. I mean, breathing new life into a place and imagining what that is. So it's not, our work is not decorative. It is intrinsic. Right? It's intrinsic to the place and how do we inspire that place? And so then it becomes this, I think of like our work as co-evolutionary. Brand and place are kind of in this, they're shaping each other over time. And so it's not like we just kind of serve up an identity and say, bye, good luck to you. I mean, we have projects we've worked on for 20 years where at every key milestone, you are deepening into the brand promise. And so that depth happens over time, but what we try to do whenever possible is how do we deliver that depth early? Because that's always the challenge with these new places. They suffer from being new. It's like I don't get it.
And it really creates the momentum, which is the hardest thing to get that initial momentum from a dead stop, right? Is like, how do we create some momentum to create this sense of place? To your latter point about how these relationships can go on over time, I think about great parks, right? That orange bicycle is absolutely iconic, and yet that community's been around a long time. You've done refresh work on that, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we started working on Great Park with 5 Point in 2006. That's 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
Now think about it.
Of your 28 years, that was 20 years ago.
Yeah, is that right? Yeah, that's right, 2006. We actually got involved in that project when it was going through entitlement. So that orange bike became kind of a promise to the community of what we're doing. We're not gonna just build more car dominated places. It was a symbol of human scale in a different pattern in Orange County. And so yeah, we infused that bike with meaning over years of storytelling and deepening into it. And our clients, they share a desire to continue to invest in their storytelling. So it's not a, well, you got this website, you're done, and maybe we'll have a few social posts. It is, there's usually a big kind of period to get to a launch, but then there's other big milestone moments throughout the project where you're envisioning the next piece. How does it layer into the brand? How does it extend it in new ways? Our brands don't sit still. They're always changing and evolving as the places are changing.
So that's really interesting. I've heard you say the terms before, giving life a way of life, and, it sounds like the way of life in that circumstance starts really, really early. How do you like, for something like we just talked about, how do you start to build that for a community that's an entitlement and that, is just getting off of the ground and you're really starting to form that?
I love that. I love that saying, giving life to a way of life because branding and marketing in this category, it's funny. You don't want to think about home and community as branded. I mean, you think about, as I said before, detergent and beer as packaged goods, as branded things. You just don't want to think about home that way. And so our approach is really more about, thinking like not selling a product, but giving life to a complex organism, right? And you all are part of that complex organism, right? And it's the community and it's the co-creation of that community with the people who live there. But your question of, like, how do you get it started is always the tricky thing, and in the case of Great Park Neighborhoods in 2006, one of the things, because that's the old El Toro Marine Base, they had some old hangars on the property, and when we invited community out to kinda learn about what we were doing, and we took over a hangar and did a whole pop-up environment that created, like, a little walkable neighborhood vibe, had orange bikes everywhere, and invited people to come talk to us about, some ideas that we had. And we didn't show them lots of renderings and give them a lot of virtual fly-throughs because those actually didn't exist then, but it was a place of conversation and experience. And people, they're looking right now like, who can they trust? And so sometimes it's just about these authentic analog moments where you believe in the vision that gets people to invest and to buy into it. Because, the question that we asked, the why behind the what of the orange bike was, just getting to a more human powered kind of way of life. And so we gave them that experience very early on. And that's during entitlements. Going back to two step, you think about how they opened, and this was just in November. They opened with a dance hall. If you know Tom and Christina, they said, well, it can't just be a generic kind of building that we just call the two step hall. um, we wanna study these old dance halls in Texas, understand the community significance of them. They were in rural towns in the late 1800s, when the German, Polish, Czech immigrants came, they brought this dance hall concept, and many of them are in disrepair around Texas today, and they said, "Let's bring that back." They went and found a craftsman to build this. They found reclaimed lumber. They have real maple floors. And so you almost walk into this environment and you feel like you're stepping back in time, which is really powerful when you've got a brand new experience that you're trying to create. I think old things make new things more interesting. Just as new things often make old things more interesting. Bringing some of that kinda just roots you and deepens you into the place, and it's just a great storytelling opportunity.
I love that. I come from a city that has a very rich history, and, in Montana, the state that we live, there's a lot of new people coming in, and it's really important for me that people really understand the history, as much as they can, and the only way they're gonna be able to know that is for people to bring back that nostalgia, and to tell those stories, and to share their experiences from the past in very authentic ways and positive ways, and kinda move that history into the future. So I find kind of what not what we're struggling with, but what we're seeing now as a change in the state that we're in is something that you guys are addressing head on and building in that history into everything that you do moving forward, which I think is just it's amazingly powerful to kind of keep that, and build upon it for the future.
And writing the news history too,
Yeah,
right? I think the
yeah.
thing that we have to be careful of in this, category is we it's easy to romance the past, and people can look at it and go, "Well, you're wiping it away," "We don't wanna see it change," and so there has to be a very authentic discussion about who we are today and how we're influenced by that past, but very honestly of today as well. And that's the real resonant concept. I mean, with Pecan Square, you talk about that dog and that experience of going out into the country. And so there's a real Texas roots story to that place too, because it was a horse farm, but it's presented in a very new way. It's not romanticized like this is the way we used to live. It's very much it's just it has an honesty, but it's rooted in those values.
Great example, I've heard Andrew and Fred talk about the conscious effort to preserve that promenade of trees. So I can see where it really helps inform what are the touchstones that we want to preserve? What are, like the idea of the dance hall? What do we want to bring, but make sure that there's some authenticity to how we articulate it so that it borrows and honors what has been in the past, but yet creates the environment for something new to happen. I mean, that's a real art form there.
Yeah, and that is, I think, it's the art is that translation. It's hard to sell something that doesn't exist yet. And so it's why I think this category often falls into a lot of cliche language and concepts, but I think the more descriptive and specific you can be about the experience you want to create, the more memorable it is, and the less it feels imported or generic. And so it is an exercise in creativity, really. I think we're pretty good at it.
I'm really curious. We talked a lot about pop-ups and analog experiences and in-person experiences. And obviously, April and I are in the world of technology. I would love to hear your take on where does technology kind of come into the mix of this and balancing with the human experience? Where do you kind of see those fitting together and marrying well?
Well, we need both, right? And they support each other quite well. I think we get in trouble when we try to mix them sometimes in certain ways, like, um, I do believe that a lot of people are looking they what they appreciate about digital is freeing up their time for more of the analog, right? And so it's like, "Just save me time." It's why I really don't like those self-checkout things in the grocery store too. It's like, I know that can save time, but it often doesn't because then I have to learn a new interface and it's just irritating, right? So it's like, okay, well, I get it that this saved somebody money, but it's disrupting my experience and my time. So that's me personally. I know a lot of people do like that, but I think your app is a perfect example, right? The Allison app is what it simplifies the logistics of community life, right? So people can be more present in it, into it. And so we find that the digital experience is critical to, like, everyone's doing their research online. So we don't need those information centers like we used to have, where we used to have everything on the wall and it gave you all the floor plans. And people come knowing more probably about these communities than the people selling them know. And so you don't really need that touchscreen experience that I think we all tried for a while. We find that people don't really engage with them because when they're physically in a place, they've done their homework, they want to feel the people, they want to feel the place, the vibe of the place. They don't want this intermediary technology to, kinda get in the way of that. So, they're looking to prove out the brand that's in their head, right? They're like, "Well, is the place gonna live up to it? Does it confirm what I've been thinking it might become? Is it delivering on its promise?" So, I don't know, I think it works best when it supports and extends the atmosphere, it doesn't replace it.
Yeah, we would definitely agree with that.
But I
Um,
do think there's a lot of people that have experimented with, like, well, just, everything is digital, and I don't know, I think you need both.
I do too. I think you're exactly right. People have an idea generally of what it would feel like to live there, but until you're physically on site feeling it versus being told, it's a it's very different, and it can be so powerful to cultivate what, as opposed to what do we want them to interact with versus how do we cultivate experiences when they're here that help them answer that question of what would it be like to live here? I think that's a really and we can help with that, but we're not gonna do that in any way close to being there.
Over the past, 15 years, we've really focused in on how do we create a third place as the first touchstone experience? You're going to get information there. You're going to learn about the community, but you're going to learn about the community by observing the community and by being a part of it. Maybe it's a coffee shop, maybe it's the dance hall, maybe there's a whole host of things that it can be, but create that real sense of community because I always say to our clients, let especially in this market, if you wait to build those kind of key experiences, your customer is going to wait too. So, invest in those little moments of, like, places, those little micro experiences that give people a little appetizer of what's to come.
Yeah. Yeah, we've definitely been exploring that as a concept in, instead of building these large amenity centers right away, or they're going to take 2 years, taking the approach of the pop ups or even just the small gathering spaces like you all have done. Memory comes so much from scent and touch and textures and the things that are around you that digital cannot. You just can't get that same impact from looking at a website and seeing pretty renderings and pretty pictures. And that's why I think what y'all are doing is so important because you are creating, those memorable spaces that are flexible enough that they can build into what the community actually becomes when it's at full build out.
Yeah, and I mean, I think everybody is struggling right now with, the cost environment around everything. And how do you create? You may not be able to build the amenity up front. So, what are those kind of creative little pop up temporary moments? One thing that we're working with Hillwood on a new project that's opening in June called Ramble. It's, in Salina, Texas, so sorry to be so focused on Texas, but we're finding ourselves there a lot these days. There was an old house that not anything of, like, historic significance. It was like a '80s era, '70s, '80s homestead on the property, and Hillwood said, "Well, we're gonna just fix it up a little bit and put some of our do a little satellite corporate office there." And it happened to be right off of Preston Road, and we said, can we carve out a little piece of that? So for Ramble, the big why behind the what is the promise of, as we say, the art of slow living, trying to slow down and restore balance in this fast paced world. Salina's on the outskirts of town. We have this promise of Salina's new backyard. Can we use the backyard of this house and that three-car garage, carve it off and create the Ramble Coffee House and backyard experience and invite community that way and show the commitment of Hillwood, actually having an office on the property too. And really, instead of making it kind of like a little back house, but really feature it. And so it is an exercise in adaptive reuse, and so there's a lot of cost savings there, even though there's a big investment to still making the place. I think it's gonna be all the difference in the world, especially in a market today, like today where you're seeing more inventory on the ground and everybody's kinda competing with the same builders. What differentiates you early? You gotta think about those things, and sometimes you can be really creative with what's already there.
Yeah, that's very true. So shifting gears, we could speak to you all day long, Amy, but I know that you have other things to do in your life. But we are curious. We always ask our guests at the end of the podcast, what inspires you day to day?
Well, for someone who can find inspiration in the grocery store, it doesn't take much. I'm so curious about almost everything. So I'm an observer, really. I could read, Jay Walker Smith's Kantar research every morning and be inspired, and it just brings a lens to how I observe my community and places that I'm visiting and just paying attention. So I don't know. I guess that's the cultural anthropologist in me is that I don't need to go anywhere exotic. I'm kind of just curious about how people shape the world and how the place shapes them back.
What advice would you give to your 25-year-old self?
My 25-year-old self, well, it's funny because I started Strada when I was 28, which I think about that, I'm like, I had no business starting a business, but that's when we did it, and so, yeah, I'm talking to my 25-year-old self, and I think I would say 2 things. I would say business is really just about people and relationships, and, lean into that, connect genuinely, and everything else will take care of itself. And define your North Stars early and let them guide you throughout your life, not just your career, but your life. And one of the things that we always say at Strada and have since day one was be true, have fun, do the unexpected in that order. And I mean, that is something I go back to. It's a touchstone. And I would say just define those things early because they'll guide you. You may not know exactly where your life is headed 5, 10 years from now. As long as they're rooted in your values, you'll get to the right place.
You have a
Be
great
true,
team
have
too,
fun.
Amy. So
Yeah. Be
Thank you
true,
for
have
that.
fun, do the unexpected. I love that. Well, for our audience out there, if you wanna learn more about Amy and her team, you can find them at stradamade.com. And Amy, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate your time today and learning more about you and in your background in anthropology. I just find that so fascinating.
Well, thanks. Loved being with you today. Appreciate your time.
Great.
thank you.
And thank you, April. Thank you to your audience, and we will see you next time.